In this guided exploration, we will journey through ancient Egyptian and Tibetan teachings on death and the afterlife, uncovering how each tradition envisions the stages of dying and what follows. We will also contemplate how the experience shifts for an enlightened soul, one who has awakened to ultimate truth, making their final passage a fundamentally different experience. Both the Egyptian and Tibetan wisdom traditions offer detailed accounts of the soul's voyage beyond life. The ancient Egyptians left behind the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and illustrations to guide the deceased through the perilous Duat underworld and into paradise. Tibetan Buddhism offers the Bardo Thodol, known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, intended to be read aloud to the dying or recently deceased to help their consciousness navigate the intermediate state, or Bardo, between death and rebirth. Both texts serve as sacred roadmaps through the unknown, meant to ensure the soul does not lose its way when the light of this life fades. The moment of death, gateway to the unknown. What truly happens at the moment of death? Spiritual teaching suggests that this pivotal moment is a gateway, one of profound significance and opportunity. In Tibetan understanding, the very instant of death is marked by an inner transformation often described in vivid elemental terms. As the body dies, the person's senses and elements dissolve one by one. Earth into water, water into fire, fire into wind, and wind into space. In that process, outer signs like loss of sensation and breath, and inner visions herald the approach of death. Finally, all that remains is a state of pure consciousness, often called the clear light of death, an all-encompassing radiance akin to a bright sky at dawn. Tibetan masters say this clear light is the fundamental reality of mind and of the universe, revealed when all worldly perceptions fall away. At this critical juncture, an untrained soul might simply black out or drift in confusion as death occurs. But an experienced meditator or enlightened being is said to recognize the clear light as their own true nature. Those who have practiced diligently in life, training in mindfulness, lucid dreaming, or deep meditation, are believed capable of maintaining full awareness as they enter the clear light, riding it as one would ride a beam of sunlight. If one can recognize this radiant light as the nature of their own mind, it is believed to be a moment of potential liberation. In other words, death becomes not an ending, but an ultimate awakening for the enlightened soul. Tibetan teachings emphasize that in the split second of dying, if the mind can remain calm and clear instead of fearful, the transition can be consciously embraced. Enlightenment, in this view, changes the experience entirely. Rather than being overwhelmed by death, the awakened soul meets it with clarity, even with a sense of homecoming to the ultimate reality they have already glimpsed in life. The ancient Egyptians, too, saw the moment of death as the beginning of a journey rather than oblivion. In their view, the soul, which they conceived as having multiple aspects, separates from the body at death. The ka, or life force, stays near the body and tomb, while the ba, often depicted as a bird with a human head, is free to leave the body and roam. At the moment of death, the ba awakens in the Duat, the mysterious realm of spirits. Egyptian texts acknowledge that the newly departed might at first be disoriented, not remembering who they are or what to do next. This is why funerary rituals were so important. The opening of the mouth ceremony was performed to release the ba from the body, and tomb walls were inscribed with guidance. The Book of the Dead, literally the book of going forth by day, was often buried with the corpse. a collection of prayers and spells intended to prompt the soul with instructions and reminders at the moment it steps into the next world. For the Egyptians, an ethical and spiritually attuned life was the best preparation for this moment. One who had lived in accordance with Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, and order, would carry a lighter, purer heart, and thus face death's gateway with far less fear. In essence, a life of virtue and wisdom readied the soul to wake up gracefully in the afterlife, just as, in Tibetan thought, a life of meditation prepares one to awaken to the clear light at death. The Tibetan view, death and the Bardo states. After the initial moment of death, Tibetan Buddhism describes the soul's journey as a sequence of transitional stages known as bardos. The word bardo means intermediate state, a gap or interval between two states of being. While living, we experience various bardos. Even the dreaming state is considered a bardo, but the most crucial are those that unfold after the death. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the consciousness of the deceased goes through up to 3 main stages in the after-death realm. The First Bardo, moment of death, Chikai Bardo. This is the immediate aftermath of dying, when the clear light dawns. All external worldly appearances have dissolved. For an adept person, this stage offers a chance to recognize the luminous Dharmakaya, ultimate reality, and attain instant liberation. If the departed soul realizes, this brilliant void is my own deepest nature, they may merge with it, achieving freedom from the cycle of rebirth. However, if they are startled or unprepared, this brilliance might overwhelm them, and they lose consciousness or clarity as it passes. The Second Bardo, Bardo of luminosity or reality, Chonyid Bardo. For those who did not attain liberation at the moment of death, there follows a period of unfolding visions and auditory phenomena. The Bardo Thurul describes how, over a series of days, the soul encounters a dazzling display of peaceful and wrathful deities, Buddha forms, and illusory landscapes. These visions mirror the contents of one's own mind. All the latent tendencies, fears, and desires accumulated through life manifest externally now. In essence, the person is confronted with their own thought forms in glorified and terrifying shapes. The text tells us that at first, the departed sees benevolent, comforting figures of light. Later, more frightening, chaotic images arise. For example, a person might perceive fierce deities wielding weapons or monstrous forms pursuing them. To the unenlightened mind, these appear real and can induce great terror or attachment. Yet, as Tibetan masters emphasize, all these apparitions are projections of the mind's nature, like dream images. Recognition is key. If the soul can remember the teachings and recognize these phantoms as illusions, chimeras, born of its own fear, they lose their power. In that moment of recognition, the frightening Bardo transforms into an opportunity for awakening. The bright awareness behind the visions shines through, guiding the soul toward liberation. Unfortunately, many souls do not recognize this. The Tibetan Book of the Dead compassionately speaks to the departed soul, urging them not to be afraid. Do not fear the radiant beings. They are your own mind. But if the soul fails to recognize the clear light at death and remains unenlightened through the ensuing visions, confusion persists. According to the teachings, those who did not practice in life or know how to recognize these signs will be deluded throughout this stage, essentially swept along by the karmic winds of their own thoughts. An artistic representation inspired by the Tibetan Book of the Dead portrays a turbulent passage through storm and darkness toward a distant light. In this modern vision, Seb Janiak's The Kingdom, 2010, the soul stands at the edge of a roaring abyss under swirling thunderclouds, symbolizing the overwhelming fears and illusions that can arise in the intermediate state. Yet amid the gloom, the clouds part to reveal a single brilliant light in the sky. This radiant opening suggests the true light of awareness that ultimately guides the soul once it understands that the surrounding terrors are insubstantial and can be overcome. The Third Bardo, Bardo of becoming or rebirth, Second Bardo. As time in the intermediate state wears on, Tibetan teachings traditionally say the entire Bardo period can last up to 49 days at most. The pull of one's karma grows stronger. The soul, if still unenlightened, starts to feel drawn toward a new life. In this stage, the consciousness assumes a subtle mental body. The individual might experience scenarios of transit. For example, visions of couples appearing which mythically represent one's future parents. In Tibetan law, at the very end of the Bardo, the soul is inexorably attracted to the circumstances that match its karmic energy. As one Tibetan Lama describes, it is like a breeze pushing you toward an open door. The soul finds itself choosing or being compelled into a womb, thus initiating rebirth. The Second Bardo endures until the next conception occurs, closing the curtain on the intermediate journey. Unless liberation was achieved in the earlier stages, the soul now enters a new life, and the cycle of samsara, suffering and rebirth, continues. It is important to note that throughout these stages, the Tibetan Book of the Dead acts as a guidebook. Traditionally, lamas or family members would read its verses over the dying or recently deceased person, almost as if speaking to the soul in the Bardo. The text continuously reminds the departed of what is real and what is illusion, urging them to recognize the clear light, or later visions for what they truly are. This compassionate practice exemplifies how Tibetan culture views death as a teachable moment, possibly the most crucial moment in which enlightenment can be attained if the soul can be guided to awareness. In summary, the Tibetan view paints the after-death journey as a dynamic, shifting inner landscape. It is at once awe-inspiring and daunting, filled with brilliant light and divine forms, but equally with mirages that reflect one's own untamed mind. For the enlightened or prepared mind, these stages hold no fear. They are recognized as the play of consciousness, and thus the soul can navigate them calmly, even attaining final liberation from the cycle. For the ordinary mind, however, the Bardo is like a mirror showing one's deepest self. Without spiritual preparation, the experience can be confusing and can lead the soul onward to another birth by force of habit and desire. The Egyptian view, Voyage through the Duat, where Tibetan Buddhism offers a primarily internal journey through mind-made landscapes, ancient Egyptian teachings present the afterlife as a grand external journey of the soul through a literal spiritual realm. Upon death, the Egyptian soul enters the Duat, a vast underworld domain full of gods, gates, trials, and wonders. This journey is famously detailed in funerary texts like the Book of the Dead, the Pyramid texts, and the Coffin texts. While each text varies in specifics, the overarching narrative is consistent. The deceased must traverse the Duat, undergo judgment, and, if worthy, achieve a blessed eternal life. In ancient Egyptian belief, the soul of the deceased stands in the Hall of Judgment to have its heart weighed against the feather of Ma'at. the divine principle of truth and justice. In this famous scene from the papyrus of Ani circa 1250 BCE, the scribe Ani and his wife, far left, witness the crucial test. Jackal-headed Anubis, guardian of the dead, carefully balances Ani's heart on the scales against the snow-white feather of Ma'at, symbolizing truth. To the right of the scales looms Amit, the devourer, part crocodile, lion, and hippo, patiently awaiting the verdict. If Ani's heart is heavy with sin and imbalance, Amit will swallow it, condemning Ani's soul to oblivion. Overseeing the trial, the ibis-headed god Thoth stands ready to record the outcome on his tablet, while a tribunal of deities sits above as judges, the scene's upper register. This moment, known as the weighing of the heart in the Hall of Two Truths, is the climax of the Egyptian soul's journey and determines its fate for eternity. Before reaching this judgment, the soul has several experiences. Upon death, as mentioned, the soul might be disoriented, but it soon encounters guides in the Duat. Typically, Anubis is said to meet the soul at the tomb and lead it forward to the Hall of Judgment. On the way, the soul may have to pass through a series of gates or caverns, each guarded by supernatural entities. The Book of the Dead provided passwords or spells to help the deceased safely overcome these obstacles. One reason a copy of the book, or at least selected spells, was buried with them. The Egyptians imagined the Duat as populated by strange beings, gods, demons, and hybrid creatures. However, unlike the Tibetan view, where these might be mind-made, the Egyptian cosmology treated them as literal beings the soul must face or befriend. For example, there were serpent demons to placate, ferry boats to catch, and protective deities like Isis or Nephthys who might come to one's aid. Throughout, the soul's objective was to reach the presence of Osiris, lord of the underworld, for the final weighing of the heart. The Hall of Ma'at, Hall of Truth, is where the ultimate judgment occurs. Here, the dead person's heart, considered the seat of emotion, memory, and morality, is weighed on the golden scales. The deceased, in preparation, would make a series of negative confessions before the 42 judges of Ma'at, proclaiming innocence of various sins. I have not stolen, I have not slain unjustly, I have not lied, and so forth. These declarations were meant to assert that one had lived a life in harmony with Ma'at. In the end, though, what matters is the scale's balance. A heart that is light, meaning it has not been weighed down by wrongdoing, guilt, and imbalance, will balance against the feather or be lighter than it. A heavy heart fails the test. This concept is both moral and spiritual. It's not the gods arbitrarily deciding one's fate, but rather one's own inner purity or impurity determining the outcome. If justified, but the heart is pure, the soul is declared true of voice or vindicated, and Osiris invites them to proceed into paradise. If not, the grim fate is immediate. The heart is thrown to the floor and devoured by Amit, resulting in the second death, complete annihilation of the soul's identity. The Egyptians did not conceive of an eternal hell. Non-existence was the worst punishment for a life spent against Ma'at. For those fortunate souls who pass the test, what lies beyond is a blissful eternity in what the Egyptians called the Field of Reeds, Aru. The Field of Reeds is often described as a mirror image of one's life on earth, but perfected. It is a realm of eternal springtime, where grain grows tall without effort, where there is no sickness, no sorrow, and where one rejoins loved ones who have gone before. In some texts, after judgment, the soul still has a journey to make, For instance, being ferried across the Lily Lake to reach this paradise. But this part of the journey is relatively effortless compared to the trials before. One ancient description says the soul will be rowed across a lily-covered lake to the paradisal fields where everything lost in life is restored. Indeed, the Egyptians believed that in Aru, the deceased would find all that was beloved and lost: family, friends, even one's favorite pets and possessions magically returned. The paradise was agrarian, an idealized Egypt, so the righteous could continue activities like farming or feasting, but without toil or grief. Scholar Rosalie David notes that rich and poor alike were allotted plots of land in this heavenly Nile Valley, and Shabti dolls, servants left in the tomb, would come to life to do any necessary work on one's behalf. It was a democratic vision of bliss. Everyone who earned it enjoyed equal peace and plenty. But what of the enlightened or prepared soul in the Egyptian context? While the Egyptians did not speak of enlightenment in the Buddhist sense, they highly valued living in accordance with Ma'at and acquiring spiritual knowledge. A person who had deeply understood the cosmic order, Ma'at, and practiced virtue was, in effect, spiritually enlightened in their worldview. Such a soul would experience the afterlife journey very differently from one who was ignorant or laden with sin. First, a righteous individual's heart would naturally be light, giving them confidence and calm at the weighing. Such a soul might face Anubis and the scales without terror, perhaps even with assurance. Second, the person who had been properly prepared through funerary rituals and knowledge of the needed spells would not be caught off guard by the challenges of the Duat. They would know the names of the gatekeepers, recite the spells to repel serpents, and invoke the protection of deities as taught by the Book of the Dead. In a sense, their journey would be smooth and swift. Some Egyptian texts imply that for the exceptionally pure or well-prepared soul, reaching paradise after judgment was straightforward. Only a short journey from the Hall of Truth to paradise, with little further obstacle. We might compare this to a seasoned traveler breezing through an airport, paperwork in hand, versus a confused traveler who gets lost. The spiritually attuned soul moves through the afterlife with clarity, whereas the unprepared may struggle. The ultimate state for an Egyptian soul that has passed beyond life is to become an Ak. The Ak was the transfigured, luminous spirit, essentially the soul in its fully realized form, free, effective, and blessed. Once the deceased was declared justified and entered the field of reeds, they underwent a transformation into this exalted state. They could then mingle freely with the gods, stars, and righteous souls. In Egyptian prayers, it was hoped that the deceased may become an Ak in heaven, shining as an undying star. This is somewhat analogous to the idea of attaining nirvana or Buddhahood. It is the completion of the soul's journey. The person's name, Ren, would live forever. Their soul, Ba and Ka, would be reunited and renewed, and they would enjoy conscious existence indefinitely. An enlightened Egyptian soul, therefore, experiences death not as a termination, but as a coronation, the moment when all spiritual truths they lived by, Ma'at, are validated and they step into a divine company. Such a soul would have no fear of Ammit. Indeed, Ammit would have no claim on them. Instead, they would be welcomed by Osiris himself as one of the starry ones. Beyond enlightenment, how awakening changes the journey. Having walked through the Tibetan and Egyptian afterlife landscapes, we arrive at a profound question. How does enlightenment alter the experience of death and what lies beyond. For a soul that has attained a high level of spiritual realization, death is said to unfold in a markedly different, more graceful way. Enlightenment, whether understood as the Buddhists' awakening to ultimate reality or the Egyptians' perfect harmony with Ma'at, is like a master key that unlocks the most benevolent paths through the post-mortem journey. In the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, an enlightened being, such as a Buddha or advanced bodhisattva, approaches death with full awareness and without attachment or fear. At the moment of death, instead of losing consciousness as the body fails, the enlightened one remains lucid and calm, even as the physical senses shut down. They recognize the clear light immediately, merging their mind with it in a final state of meditation. Tibetan literature describes how highly realized lamas can remain in a meditative posture for days after clinical death, their consciousness stabilized in the clear light, a phenomenon called tukdam. In this state, their body does not begin to decay as normal, and sometimes subtle signs like a glow or warmth at the heart may persist, indicating that their awareness is still present on a deeper plane. For such a being, the entire sequence of bardos becomes optional. They are no longer swept along by karmic winds. They may choose to manifest in the bardo to help others or take another rebirth intentionally, out of compassion. But they are free, not compelled by ignorance or karma anymore. In effect, enlightenment means graduation from the cycle of death and rebirth. When Gautama Buddha died, it is said he entered parinirvana, the final nirvana, in which he relinquished the last vestiges of worldly existence. The Buddha's mind, having no delusion, simply released itself into the infinite peace of nirvana. For unenlightened observers, the Buddha's death may have looked ordinary. He suffered an illness and passed away. But Buddhist scripture insists that his experience was wholly different internally. There was no grasping, no fear, only a voluntary relinquishment of the finite form, like a drop of water returning to the boundless ocean. Similarly, other great masters in Tibetan and other Buddhist traditions are said to meet death joyfully. Far from dreading it, they may even show supernatural signs of their transition. One famous example in Tibetan lore is the phenomenon of the rainbow body, where an accomplished yogi's physical body dissolves into light at death, leaving behind only hair or nails. This is seen as evidence that the person's consciousness fused completely with the fundamental light, Dharmakaya, and did not incarnate again in an ordinary form. While these are extraordinary cases, they illustrate the core idea. An enlightened soul does not experience death as a dark unknown or a judgment, but as a conscious passage into a state of unity with the cosmos. In the enlightened state, the afterlife is not a separate mysterious realm. It is one's own continuum of mind, which one now masters. The peaceful and wrathful deities of the Bardo pose no threat because the enlightened one realizes, even while alive, that samsara and nirvana are one. All forms and illusions are expressions of the one mind. Thus, at death they simply remain in the clarity of that understanding, and the wild visions of the Bardo either do not manifest at all or appear as old friends, recognized instantly as self-appearances. In a sense, the enlightened being carries their heaven within them. Wherever their consciousness goes, it brings its own peace. From the Egyptian angle, consider a soul that has become a paragon of Ma'at, utterly truthful, just, and reverent. Such a soul in life might be akin to what we'd call a saint or sage. At death, this person is fully prepared. The Egyptians might say, Osiris already knows their name. In the Hall of Judgment, their heart is light as a feather, perhaps even lighter. The weighing is a mere formality. The 42 judges nod in approval as the soul recites each confession with genuine innocence. One might poetically imagine Thoth smiling as he notes the scale's perfect balance, and Anubis proclaiming the soul true of voice, without hesitation. In effect, an enlightened Egyptian soul would pass directly into the company of the gods. Some Egyptian texts, especially for pharaohs and high initiates, speak of the deceased becoming one with Osiris, or joining Ra's solar bark to travel the sky with the sun. These are metaphors indicating that the soul has been accepted among the divine, much as a star joins the constellation of the imperishable stars. In practical terms, the enlightened soul in Egypt's view has no more tests to fear. They will not die the second death because Ammit finds nothing to eat. They will not be turned away at any gate because every gatekeeper already recognizes a master of the mat. Another way enlightenment changes the journey is the state of mind at the time of death. In both traditions, the teachings emphasize that the mind's state at death is crucial in shaping what comes next. Fear, anger, or clinging can lead to painful experiences or unfavorable rebirths, whereas peace, trust, and focus can lead upward. An enlightened person approaches death in a state of equanimity or even blissful absorption. The Tibetan sage Milarepa reportedly said, "I look forward to death with great joy, for I shall merge with my Lama, teacher, in the Pure Land." The idea here is that for the realized mind, dying is like walking through a door into a familiar room, rather than being pushed into a chaotic wilderness. Likewise, an ancient Egyptian who had devoted themselves to spiritual wisdom might view death as meeting beloved mentors. For instance, joining Osiris, whom they served devoutly, rather than meeting a frightening stranger. In fact, Egyptian initiates underwent rituals that simulated death. For example, spending a night in the sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid, according to some legends, all to rehearse the journey of the soul. By the time the real death came, they believed they knew the route by heart. In this way, enlightenment, or initiation, robs death of its sting. It becomes the final initiation, not a tragedy. Reflections. 2 paths, 1 truth. The Tibetan and Egyptian teachings, for all their differences in symbolism and doctrine, converge on a profound philosophical truth. What we carry in our consciousness, our truthfulness, wisdom, fears, or delusions, shapes our experience beyond death. Both traditions assert that living a just and enlightened life is the key to a positive afterlife. In Tibet, this means training the mind to recognize its own true nature. In Egypt, it means purifying the heart and aligning with Ma'at. In both cases, at the moment of death, the soul essentially meets itself. The Tibetans' peaceful or wrathful deities can be seen as mirrors of one's own mind, just as the Egyptian scales weigh the content of one's own heart. Thus, both traditions are telling us the journey beyond life is not something external that happens to you. It is something that unfolds from within you, according to who you have become. It is also striking that both cultures provide detailed guides for the afterlife journey, suggesting a deep compassion and care for those who have died. The Tibetan Book of the Dead speaks directly to the departed, almost like a friend whispering advice in a confusing time. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, through its spells and illustrations, serves as a reassuring map for the soul, reminding it of its own power and knowledge. Even though one is read aloud and the other placed in the tomb, their purpose is similar: to shed light in the darkness, to dispel fear with understanding. Both traditions imagine that the newly deceased might be startled or lost. The Tibetans say the soul might not recognize it has died and see familiar places or relatives, illusions of the Bardo. The Egyptians say the soul may forget its own name or life, and in both cases, the teachings provide the needed orientation. Tibetan lamas chant, "O noble one, now you are experiencing the radiance of the clear light." Egyptian priests would ensure the deceased could say, "I am purified of all sins. My heart is light." These practices underscore a shared view that death is a journey best faced with knowledge and guidance, not ignorance. Philosophically, we can discern a common thread. Moral and spiritual truth is the compass in the afterlife. Ma'at in Egypt represents cosmic truth and justice. Likewise, the Tibetan requirement to recognize the nature of mind is about perceiving the ultimate truth, Dharma, of reality. In both teachings, those aligned with truth find their way to light, whether it's the radiance of nirvana or the sunshine of the field of reeds. Those who cling to falsehood, selfishness, or illusion lose their way, resulting in either rebirth, continued samsara, or the second death, oblivion. Thus, both paths, in their own eloquent languages, urge human beings to seek truth and cultivate virtue in this life, as it profoundly affects what comes beyond. Of course, there are differences too. Tibetan Buddhism envisions the end of the journey as escaping the cycle entirely, transcending individual existence to merge with the infinite. No self, no rebirth. Ancient Egypt, on the other hand, cherished a more personal continuity, an eternal life where the personality, with its name and memories, lives on in joy. One might say Buddhism's ultimate goal is enlightenment beyond individuality, whereas Egypt's goal is a blessed immortality of the individual. Even so, both are states of supreme peace. One is the peace of nirvanic unity, the other, the peace of a heavenly paradise. Another difference is how they frame judgment. The Egyptians externalized it. A court of gods weighs your heart. The Tibetans internalized it. Your own mind's confusions are the judgment, and Yama, the Lord of Death, that one might perceive in the Bardo, is ultimately a manifestation of your own karma. Yet, intriguingly, Tibetan texts sometimes also describe a judging process. For example, a mirror of karma being held up before the deceased by the Lord of Death, in which one's deeds are reflected. This mirrors the weighing of the heart in a more psychological metaphor. Both images serve to convey that justice follows the soul. We face the consequences of how we lived. There is no escaping ourselves. A calm passage beyond. Let us reflect on what these rich teachings mean for us here and now. Life and death form a continuous cycle, and as the Tibetans say, life is a preparation for the moment of death. The Egyptians would agree that one's life, deeds, and character are weighed when life is over. In understanding the journey of the soul beyond life, whether through the serene lens of Buddhism or the storied mythology of Egypt, we are invited to live more consciously today. These teachings encourage us to cultivate enlightenment in life, to purify our hearts, to seek wisdom, to confront our fears and anger, our personal demons, so that when the time comes, we, like the enlightened ones, can face the final threshold with clarity and courage. Imagine then approaching the end of life as if it were a gently opening door. On the other side of that door, a light shines. Maybe the golden sunlight of an eternal field, maybe the pure white light of emptiness, or maybe the familiar light of love welcoming us home. If we have cultivated inner light during life, we will recognize and move toward that light without hesitation. The Tibetan sage calmly recognizes the clear light and becomes one with it. The Egyptian heart, that is light as a feather, is automatically drawn upward, not downward. In either case, fear melts away. What remains is transition, even transcendence. The journey of your soul, in truth, began long before your birth and continues long after your death. Physical life is but one chapter in a much larger adventure. In the end, the precise imagery, be it Buddhist Buddhas or Egyptian gods, matters less than the underlying assurance these traditions give us. Death is not an abyss of nothingness, but a pathway. For those who seek and find enlightenment, it is a pathway beyond even enlightenment, beyond the limitations of form, and into the great mystery of what lies on the other side of complete awakening. For others, it is a pathway of learning, purification, and eventually returning to the source of light. In this calm and reflective light, we can begin to view our own mortality not with panic, but with a sense of sacred curiosity and hope. May these teachings from Tibet and Egypt serve as lanterns in the dark, reminding us that the journey of the soul is ultimately a journey toward truth and light. And as we walk our path in life, may we do so with hearts unburdened and minds prepared, so that when we too make the great transition beyond life, we shall find that we are also beyond fear, and perhaps even beyond enlightenment, resting in the eternal embrace of the divine.